Bonjour à tous and welcome to this webinar on the 6 common mistakes that Gîte owners are making once they buy a property or when they want to buy a property. In terms of format today, I'm going to do a presentation for about 20-30 minutes max, and then I will be taking your questions. The format for today, I'm going to remind you the difference between Gîte, Airbnb, chambre d'hôte, table d'hôte. We're all talking about the same thing. Then I will share the 6 common mistakes that Gîte owners are doing with their properties. Then I will recap the process of registering a Gîte in France, and I will provide links to a bit of extra help. So before we get started, a bit about myself. If you don't know me, my name is Valerie Aston, and I am a business advisor. I help expatriates prepare, create, and manage their first business in France. And I've been doing this for 17 years with Start Business in France. And before that, I worked as a business advisor for 10 years for French entrepreneurs, which is why I know loads of weird and wonderful rules about all types of activities, legal structures, business taxes, and so on. As part of my services with Start Business in France, I do a lot of business visa applications. So when you're at home and you want to prepare your visa application, power hour call to do some brainstorming, fix issues, have ideas about taxes and so on, business registration, private forum, and online courses on applying for a business visa and managing a macro entrepreneur business, and soon a Gîte course. I'm a mum of 3 teenagers, and I'm based in Normandy, very close to the British Isles and the D-Day beach in Normandy. Now, before we get started on the topic, let's talk about the difference between Gîte, chambre d'hôte, Airbnb. I know that some of you might be annoyed that I use the word Airbnb in the same. Basically, Gîte means meublé de tourisme. We also talk about hébergement touristique, and it's a furnished house, apartment, flat, or villa that is rented for a short period of time for holidaymakers. And usually, when you book a Gîte, you're going to be greeted by your host. And often the Gîte, or most of the time, the Gîte is actually located where the owner is living. Chambre d'hôte is when you actually have an overnight stay at the owner's property. So you're going to have the English will be bed and breakfast. You're going to stay overnight and you'll have breakfast at the host property. Then table d'hôte is when the host is also offering dinner to their guests, and you're going to have dinner at the table, sharing dinner with them. I love those. If you're going for a scouting trip, it's a great way to know an area, get to know what's happening. And Airbnbs, I'm also covering it because some of you might be buying a property, but not planning to actually live in France, but renting it and be an Airbnb. So it's also a furnished house, apartment, villa, rented for a short period of time for holidaymakers, but usually you don't have the kind of extra service or closeness that you'll have with a Gîte. Most of the time, you're not greeted by your host. You might have a key box. And for the owners, it's often a top-up income or an investment, or at least it's how it is seen in France. Let's look at the first mistake that most Gîte owners are doing. This one is to not have a clear vision for the property. So you might be intrigued as to, yes, I know what I want to do, so let me explain what I mean. When you go and buy a property or you want to do a Gîte, you need to have a very clear vision. You have to define what you want to achieve with this property or with your future property. Is it going to be a family holiday home that you're going to be renting to cover parts of the cost? Is it more a source of top-up income as you retire to France to just complement your social security, your private pension until you get your state pension? Or is it a full-time business? That is very important to identify because there will be an impact on the turnover you're going to be reaching, and also the type of property that will generate enough income. Then ask yourself, which activities or services do you want to do? So are you really going to have the Gîte more as a property that you're going to be using for your friends and family, and in the meantime, you're going to be using it for guests, so rent it in the summer? Or are you really going to go for a business? So you're looking for a property with probably 2 or 3 Gîtes to make it viable? Or are you looking to provide more like a retreat business where people are going to stay with you and have some kind of activity? So wellness, yoga, art, anything, cooking. And with that kind of project, you're probably going to have, beside the rooms, you might have a room that you dedicate for the workshop or studio that you can use for this activity. Once you do this, you're going to set your vision before you start searching. And the idea of doing this exercise is to have a very clear idea of what you want to do, so at least you search for a property that fits your needs. If we're looking for a business, we need to generate enough income to validate a visa and renew a visa. So you're going to have several sources of income. If it's more a top-up income, you can go for a smaller property. So this is going to save you time as well as for the estate agents you're going to work with, because if you give them a brief as to, okay, that's our family project, or that's my project, that's what I want to do, they're going to look for properties that have the potential to match your vision. This is also a perfect timing to check the French rules that may be applicable. And for that, I would recommend to book a power hour with me, because often you say, oh, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. And it's just not feasible with the French rules, or you're going to have to apply for specific authorization. So you want to be aware of what you need to ask, the authorization you need to validate before you include it in your project, because otherwise you get stuck later, whether you get at the visa stage or when you want to create it and realize that it's not feasible. Which leads me to the next mistake, which is not checking the rules before buying. So not checking the rules is the most unknown. I should say that I'm surprised, not because I'm working with expat, but the French government, the French local authorities have been bashing on about this one for years. It has always been compulsory to declare your activity, but somehow many people didn't bother to do it. And because there was no way of controlling it, it wasn't very much done. But now that the UK is out of the EU and they need to have business visa, now that we have more people coming from the US, now that we have more Airbnbs, this rule has been really pushed hard. There's no more waiting. You have to make sure that you declare your gîte or Airbnb to the mairie, and this is called déclaration de meublé de tourisme. So this is normally when you're about to register to start your gîte, you go to the mairie and you fill a one-page document called déclaration de meublé de tourisme to confirm that the mairie is actually allowing you to rent your property. And what is very important, and that's probably the most important thing that I will say today, is that you want to do this before you put an offer for property, before you buy a property. Because if you buy a property for a gîte business and then you realize that the mairie say no, you're stuck with a property that you can't rent. So really, whenever you look for properties, well, be clear about it to your agent for a start, what you're going to look for. And before you put the offer through, double check with your agent or check with the mairie. This is what we plan to do. Will we have the authorization? This is even more important now because in France, like in Spain or other European countries, there's been air bashing about housing issues where people can't find properties to rent because many properties are being bought by people investing and turning them into Airbnb, which has two impacts: that local people working locally can't find a property to rent, and also that some villages are becoming ghost villages because all the properties are empty and there's nobody living in it. And for instance, in my area in Normandy, about an hour and a half from Mont Saint-Michel, which is one of the biggest attractions in the northwest, so the Mont Saint-Michel Island, all the villages around it, a lot of them, there's just no inhabitants because people have been investing, because it's one of the most visited area in France, because it's only 3 hours from Paris, and local inhabitants are struggling to rent. So many town halls are now putting a cap on the properties that can be rented. That's the first one to check before you buy. Also know that a few laws have been voted over the last few years, Loi Allure, that are putting a cap or some extra rules to just try to cap the Airbnbs. So part of those rules, for instance, when you own a property, and that is your main property. So we talk about résidence principale. So this one is when you are living in France. This is your main home and you want to rent it. So the Loi Allure and the Loi Elan has actually capped the number of days that you can rent your property per year, and the national number of days is 120 days per year that you can rent your property. So that's important to know, for instance, because I had the example from Rupert Springfield from the Gîte Guru, who's doing some interviews of some of his customers. One of his customers had a large property that they were renting, but it was their own. So for them, they knew that their season is 120 days. They have a higher end property, so it's still a business, but they have to do the activity in 120 days. Since 2025, we now also have the Loi Le Maire, and again, the aim of that law was to say the government can't make decisions for everyone. We're giving more power to the mayor, who will actually decide that if they want to, they can lower that threshold of the number of days from 120 days to 90 days. And so this has already been applied in towns that want to avoid having too many Airbnb. For instance, Paris and Marseille have already implemented that. And in 2026, Bordeaux, Nice, and Lyon are moving down from 120 days to 90 days because they want to make sure their city doesn't become like a dormitory. It's different if it's an investment. If you're renting your main property, you want to check this. Just know that usually those rules is more in bigger towns that they are applicable. If you live in the middle of nowhere, like one of my customers from Holland said to me, à coin paumé, which is a nice expression to say in the middle of nowhere, that won't apply because if you live in rural area, most of the time the mayor would be pleased that somebody comes and live long term in the village, might bring some kids or might bring some life and also will attract tourism. Know that, for instance, if you buy what they call corps de ferme, which is like a farm or a mass, or you have a manor and you might have several properties on the main site, the one where you live is capped at 120 days. And then don't assume that rules will work like back home. And you think, oh yeah, that'd be nice. I'd quite fancy turning this little shed into a small cafe so that the passing trade can stop for tea and cakes. You can't do that because it's a change of use. The property is changing, or that premises, that building is turning from a private use to a shop. You're going to need to ask for an authorization from the mairie. You're going to need to inform the tax office. So things like this, you want to check. For instance, if you want to serve, people who might have pool and dinner, want to serve alcohol to their guests, you need to have a drinks license, you need to take a specific training. So again, that's something to check with the mairie, or you might start without the alcohol, take the training, buy the license and do it later. Some of you are also thinking about adding tree huts, glamping pods, camping, because you see all this space and you think, wow, I could have caravanning coming here or camping cars coming here, I have 2 tree huts here. And you just can't do that if it's your own property. You need to ask for an authorization from the mairie. And know that if you're doing glamping pods, campings, wherever you're putting spots on your property, if it's less than 6 plots, you need to ask an authorization from the mairie. And if it's more, it's not even the mairie, it's the department, so it's much stricter. So usually people who do this, I would say cap it to 6 and double check with the mairie in the first place that they will give you this authorization, because if you include that, for instance, in a business plan for someone with a business visa, when you get to validate your project, unless you have the written authorization from the mairie, they'll say no. So in that case, maybe plan it for year 2 to give yourself some time. Now, let's look at mistake number 3, which is to forget the impact of buying a property on the type of visa that you will need to request. So good news for all the European citizens. Yeah, it's all clear. You can just cross the border, do the restoration of your property, declare it with the mairie, register it. Super easy. Just your passport is enough. So for you, you have a clear path on the motorway to handle your project. For those of you who are non-European citizens and you're not moving to France, so we're talking about a Gîte or Airbnb without any services. Very important, not services, otherwise you're seen as a business. And your Gîte or Airbnb is seen more as a top-up income. You don't need a business visa. You don't need a business visa or a visa. You can stay at home all the time and visit once a year or twice a year using your 90 days out of 180 days rules, if that's all you want to do. So there's no visa in order to register the property itself. You buy the property and then once it's ready, you can register. If you are a non-European citizen and that you are moving to France, but you're inactive, so you come here as a retiree, you come to have a break, enjoy life, you don't plan to work remotely or anything. So this would be somebody, for instance, like a retiree on a long stay visitor visa, or anyone on a long stay visitor visa who's not working. So you can have a Gîte, provided this is a top-up income, and the Gîte or the bookings is going to generate less than 23,000 euros of income. So for instance, you are a retiree, or you have a private pension, or you have social security, or you might also have some rental income from home. You don't work, but you bought a property on which there's a Gîte that you could rent, maybe 15,000 euros, 20,000 euros of booking per year. You could register that as what we call a non-professional setup, LMNP, loueur, meublé, non professionnel. I'll explain that word in a moment. So you're a non-professional, remember the word LMNP, which I'll explain in a moment. And then if you are a non-EU citizen, moving to France, but this time as a business, so the Gîte retreat is going to generate your income once you're here. So you're going to provide some Gîte with services, you might do retreats, or definitely for sure you have or you have more than 23,000 euros per year of booking. So for instance, if you're in this setup and they see that as time goes by, you're getting close and there's more potential for much more, that would be the time to apply for business visa in order to either you cap it to say that's enough, I don't want to run as a business, so you cap your bookings, or if you have more potential, that's when you look at setting up a business. So in that case, you would need to apply for a business visa. The two visas that we're looking for are the visa profession libérale and the visa talent. So visa profession libérale is a visa issued for 1 year, renewable from France. You don't need to make any investment in the business, but it's highly recommended to have at least 18,000 euros of savings. And visa talent is a visa where you need to have a master's degree or at least 5 years experience in your field with proof, and you're going to be investing 30,000 euros in the business. And for this one, this is a multi-year visa, so you could be issued with several years. It's a 1 year renewable, so you could be getting 1 to 4 years. Now, we'll probably talk a little bit in visas in your Q&As later on. Let's talk about mistake number 5. So choosing the wrong setup. And you see I've used coins because if you choose the wrong setup, you might be losing some money. So for non-professional, those of you who are not moving to France or for whom it's a top-up income, we're talking about LMNP, which stands for loueur meublé non professionnel. And the reminder is that your yearly bookings have to be below 23,000 euros. And the tax office can even be a bit tighter where they say it is a secondary source of income, so you've got something else, and it's less than 23,000 euros per year. But if you are, for instance, a non-resident, you plan to come to France, the rule is 23,000 euros of income. So for this one, you have two types of regimes. So regimes, think of a diet, is the way you're going to be paying your taxes. And we have the first choice, which is called régime réel simplifié. And that's where you're going to be taxed on profit. So sales minus bookings, minus running expenses, minus depreciation, minus interest gives you your profit. And on that profit, you would be paying a tax called CSG, CRDS, and the rate went from 17.2 to 18.6 on the 1st of Jan 2026. The second option, so for this one, you would need to have an accountant to handle a yearly declaration to track your expenses with a specific dedicated bank account. And the second one is called régime micro-BIC, like a micro business, bénéfices industriels et commerciaux. And this one, the regime is simplified. Is basically the tax office says, okay, we're just going to make it easier. Don't worry about tracking expenses. We're just going to apply a rebate of 30% to your bookings. And then we'll apply the same tax of the CSG of 17.6%. So I would say the choice between these two varies from one person to the other. Someone who's retired in France might have a small Gîte and they handle the changeover, they handle the garden maintenance. If it's a small income, micro-BIC is just much easier to handle. You do your own declaration. In your personal French income tax, you just have to enter the amount that you've had in terms of booking. The tax office does a rebate, and you don't need to produce any kind of loss and profit account. Régime réel simplifié is more for someone who's managing somewhere remotely. They might have an agent coming they might have someone coming, conciergerie services doing the bookings. They might have a cleaner, they might have a gardener, and basically there's not much money earned at all. So in that case, you would go for tax on profit. I would say small warning on this one. French properties are meant to be held on the long term. If you are restoring to sell it in 2-3 years, I won't necessarily recommend using réel simplifié, because if you're under réel simplifié, when you sell your property, you're going to have to reintegrate the depreciation that you've applied before they calculate the capital gain and taxation on capital gain. So if you want to sell quickly your property, look into what the cost or the implication will be for capital gain. It's not something that I'll cover in the Q&A. It's something to discuss with an accountant. Now let's talk about those of you who are going to go for a professional setup. So you're going to create a business. So most people would start with a micro-entrepreneur business because it's the easiest business to set up in France. It's a pay-as-you-earn system. It's a sole trader. It's registered under your name. You're only going to start paying taxes once you start earning some income, once you start having some bookings. Now, you might have heard us last year, 2025, 2026, there's been a lot of waiting of new rules applicable to Gîtes, especially with the loi Le Meur. And the biggest impact that was voted with the Loi Le Maire in a way to try to avoid having too many Airbnbs, and it makes the Airbnbs and Gîte together. They say if you're registering a Gîte Airbnb as a micro entrepreneur, your turnover is capped at 15,000. And you think, wow, not even a business, 15,000. How can I live from that? And just know that there's a cap, but there's a way around it. In order to let your turnover go much higher, up to 77,700 euros, you need to get your Gîte classified with a body called Atout France. And basically means that you're going to have a body or representative of that body coming to assess your Gîtes, give it a ranking, and as long as you've been validated, we don't really care whether you got 1 star or 5 stars, as long as you classified with Atout France, your Gîte goes up, turnover goes from 15 to 17,000. So it's okay to register as a macro entrepreneur from day one, as long as straight away you are in the process of applying for the Atout France validation in year one, so that your turnover is not capped. That's going to be part of your strategy from day one. As you buy your property, you prepare for your visa, you already have this in mind. So as part of your strategy, when you're looking at your property improvements, you look at those criteria to integrate them and make sure you pass the test. Just know that before 2025, basically the micro-entrepreneur threshold, Gîtes were considered as commerçant, so buy to resell, which I suppose was also a loop in the system. Your turnover used to be 188,000 euros, which was good for people with multi-properties. And so for now, it's more, you can see you limited 77,000 euros. It's not so interesting, but if you're starting from scratch, that's really good, probably for year one or year two, the Gîtes that I'm working with. When you're doing 60 to 80k euros of turnover, you're already doing quite well. It might take you a couple of years to get there. So your Gîte is not considered as a service. So the turnover is 77,000 euros, and your social charges is going to be 12.3% of your turnover. Just know that if you get classified with Atout France, the other benefits from this is that your social charges will go from 12% to 6%, making the micro entrepreneur already more interesting. In terms of other business setup, I'm going to go quite quickly on this, and I recommend that basically you book a call to talk about this to see how it might suit your property. But you have the choice, for instance, between entreprise individuelle, sole trader, or sole under régime réel simplifié, where on this one, you're going to be taxed on profit. So you're going to be claiming back, and you can see 46%, all of you are going, no, 46%. But just know that you are going to deduct all your running expenses, you're going to depreciate your equipment, you're going to include the tax foncière and so on. So you're reducing all the costs. So with this one, anything which is to do with the maintenance and improvements of the Gîte, you're going to bring it back on the business, so you reduce the profit. Warning from me, if you're on a business visa, you still want to make a profit. Don't go for a loss or a nil, because if you have a business visa and you're wasting money, you're losing money, you have a loss, or there's not enough income, 18,000 euros net, at least after social charges, you won't renew your visa. So be very careful. Those of you who want to be tax clever, you don't want to be tax clever. Well, you will, but you choose a different business setup. You don't want to be too clever by not paying taxes, because your visa won't be renewed. And then you could also have a SASU, which is more like an incorporated business, like the UK Limited, the South American Pty, the US LLC, where you have a mixture of salary and dividends. To me, this one, most of the time, it doesn't really apply to Gîtes. It's more where we have a large property, where we might do events, because the French salary is quite costly. Many properties, when they do retreat, they end up having either an earl or a son, not so much a SASU, unless you have a job somewhere else beside the activity. So my recommendation tend to be start small, then grow with your business. Same thing when you apply for a visa, keep it simple. Don't try to be super clever with a complex structure, having a song with a loss, because when you apply for your visa, they will want to see the letters of incorporation. You may not make enough money in year one to renew your visa. So it's often safer to start with a micro entrepreneur, do your first season, renew your visa, and then as you grow, as you develop the activity, that's where you look into setting up an earl or a son. And the last mistake that I'm sharing with you today, we're almost at the 30 minutes, is to not register or not register your activity or not declare your income. I still came across a few people who did this last year. I just can't believe that it's still possible to happen. You have to declare your activity in France, even if you live abroad. The property is here, it's got to be registered here, and the income has to be registered here. So first one would be to declare your Gîte or Airbnb with the mairie, filling that déclaration de meublé touriste. Then for all of you, whether you're a business or whether you're a non-professional, you are going to have to register with ANPI, Guichet Unique, and this will give you what is called a SIRET number, which is a unique business number, which you will be using for the rental platforms to prove that you are an officially declared activity in France, and also for insurance purposes. Once you're all set up, you also want to check whether how does the taxe de séjour work in your area. So when people are staying with you, usually they pay a little tax that goes to the Board of Tourism, Office de Tourisme, that will go towards promoting tourism in France. You have to collect that little tax and you have to set up an account with the for the taxe de séjour. Just know that tax isn't included in your turnover. You're collecting it for somewhere else, so it's not included in your turnover. And finally, you have to declare your income in France. Even if you live in the UK, you live in Australia, the US, and you're renting a holiday home, that activity, the income from this property, has to be declared in France. Not your worldwide income, but as a non-resident, you say, I have a rental income in France, this is how much it is, and you pay some income tax on that. So if you're a non-professional, we talked about LMNP, you're going to be declaring your income 1 year later, so N+1, in your French income tax declaration. Let's say you create your Gîte in 2026, you're going to be declaring your income in May 2027. So you do the whole year, there's nothing to pay up front. The following year in May, you file your French income tax and your bill will actually come around September time. So quite a delay after that. First year, you do it by paper. The year after, you do it online. I recommend just having an accountant doing it for you. If you are a business, you're going to declare your activity from day one, and you will be paying some social charges to your staff, which goes towards your health cover, your French pension, training fund, French system. And for the business, you also have an account with Impôt. For some of you, might be VAT registered, or for a small tax called CFE. And then so that's the business taxes. And then for you as an individual, you will also file your personal income tax, where you'll declare the income taken or generated by the business. So that's the taxes. But remember, you're probably going to do a double declaration, but there's a double taxation agreement. So whatever is declared in France is not taxable back home. If you have a Gîte in France, it has to be declared and taxed here. But in the US, you'll say, okay, I've got this income, but it has already been taxed in France. So you have a tax credit. You don't have to pay it again. So let me show you the recap in a small visual, so it'll be easier for you to see. Here's the recap of creating a Gîte. If you're a non-resident, you buy a property here, but you don't plan to live here. So you're going to be looking for the property. Once you find the one you love, a coup de cœur, you're going to check with the mairie to make sure that you'll be able to rent it as a Gîte or Airbnb, but this time you don't declare it, you just double check. You're going to sign the promesse d'achat, compromis de vente, acte de vente, so that takes like about 3 months to go through. And once you own the property, you've signed the final acte de vente, you have the keys, then you can go and register the Gîte with ANPI. Now, if you are coming, but this time you come to move to France, you want to be a French resident, you're going to be looking for the property. Again, check with the mairie that you're allowed to rent it. You're going to buy the house. And then if you go for, you want to come for a business, you're going to have to, at this stage, apply for the business visa. Or if you come on a long stay visitor visa, same thing, you would apply for the visa at this stage. At this stage, this is where, now that you own the property, I haven't added here, but that's where I would fill in this declaration with to the mairie. At least for the business. For the business, you can include that proof that the mairie is allowing you to rent the property. Once you have the business visa or the long stay visa, you move to France, and at this stage, you register the Gîte. So those were the 5 mistakes that most property owners are doing when they look for a Gîte or they create a Gîte. Extra resources from me that you can look at. I mentioned the Power Hour. This is where you book a call with me. We talk about business, visa, taxes, setup, timescale. I'll add the link below in the replay. And in February, I'm launching my new course, which is Create Gîte or Airbnb in France. So it'd be covering both for resident and non-resident, whether it's a business or a top-up income. And in that course, the course goes into all the rules that are applicable, how to look for property, your vision, the new rules, the trends, the different business setup and taxes and so on. And there will be also a few live classes, including the live class on taxes and visas, because that's a big chunk. And I'm also waiting for the 2026 budget, which we're still waiting, which could have an impact. We'll also have a live group call with Gîte owner who's going to come and share her experience. And there will be a meetup a couple of months later to catch up on your projects. The idea with this course is that it's not like today, your camera is alive, we're talking to each other, and we've got this small group of people who are sharing the project. Obviously, there will be confidentiality agreements so that the information that you share on the course cannot be shared outside. But I want this little group to be together so you can benefit from your research from one another, and also have this kind of little group of support that are in the same type of project as you.